everyone. Today we are going to be highlighting a very famous French sculptor, Auguste Rodin. Rodin was born in 1840 to a working class family in Paris, the second child of Marie Cheffet and Jean-Baptiste Rodin, who was a police department clerk. He was largely self-educated and began to draw at age 10. Between ages 14 and 17, he attended the Petite École, a school specializing in art and mathematics, where he studied drawing and painting. In 1857, Rodin submitted a clay model of a companion to the École des Beaux-Arts, or the Grande École, in an attempt to win entrance. Unfortunately, he did not succeed, and 2 further applications were also denied. It seems likely that his interest in naturalism did not fit with the school's academic style. So after a third rejection, a dejected Rodin took employment in plaster workshops where he created architectural ornaments. It wasn't until a trip to Italy around 1875 that he really developed his own personal style. And in 1877, his first sculpture was accepted into the Paris Salon. So here's Rodin's sketchbook, also known as the Massbaum album. And you can see the dates range from 1860 to 1880. And it's the most complete record of his early draftsmanship. It contains drawings of animals, street scenes, landscapes, and figures. So starting with his sculptures, we're beginning with probably his most globally famous sculpture. The Thinker was actually created to be perched atop another sculpture of his, The Gates of Hell, that we'll look at on another slide. The figure was originally supposed to represent Dante, the Italian poet, but Rodin eventually separated the figure from the gates, exhibiting it alone. Influenced by Michelangelo, the feature is in fact a symbol of the modern secular man, strong in mind and body, but lonely and doubtful in the position he has created for himself as master of his own universe. Although the seated figure is lost in deep thought, the dynamic pose gives him a sense of movement. At first glance, the pose appears to be natural, but in fact, the man's right arm on his left knee is twisted in an exaggerated fashion. What makes my thinker think, said Rodin, is that he thinks not only with his brain, but with his knitted brow, his distended nostrils and compressed lips, with every muscle of his arms, back, and legs, with his clenched fist and gripping toes. This particular piece really started to gain popularity when Rodin started making replications of it, both bigger and smaller than the original. And in 1904, the city of Paris installed a larger version of the work as a public monument. So here's The Gates of Hell, previously mentioned. In 1880, Rodin was commissioned to create a set of bronze doors for a new museum in Paris. Inspired by the Divine Comedy written by Dante, Rodin planned to decorate the doors with characters that Dante met on his fictional journey through hell. The sculptor eventually discarded the idea of a strict narrative and instead created this weightless, chaotic world filled with more than 200 figures in the throes of pain and despair. Some you can see on the right and left up close. Although the planned museum never came to fruition, Rodin worked on the sculpture for nearly 37 years, periodically adding, removing, or modifying elements to it. This pair of figures developed out of Rodin's Gates of Hell and demonstrates the artist's tendency to reuse and adapt figures from earlier compositions. The female figure is based on a voluptuous torso that appears in the upper left portion of the gates. Here she's fully formed and joined in a passionate embrace with a male figure who has small wings on his back. Rodin tempered the work's overt eroticism by giving it a variety of classical titles, first called Zephyr and Earth, and later exhibited in the Paris Salon of 1897 as Cupid and Psyche. This piece is now called Eternal Spring or Eternal Springtime. In 1346, the English King Edward III laid siege to the French port of Calais. 11 months later, Edward demanded the surrender of 6 of the town's leading men, or burghers, in return for sparing its citizens. So Rodin's sculpture commemorates this episode and emphasizes the internal struggle that each man has as he walks towards his fate wearing a sackcloth and a rope halter. The burghers were later spared thanks to the intervention of the English Queen, who feared that their deaths would bring bad luck to her unborn child. And the original work is a public work located in the city of Calais. Rodin explored the expressive power of hands almost obsessively, using them to convey an infinite variety of emotions, fury, anguish, fatigue, and as metaphors for creation. And it's not that he conceived the left hand as a study for the Burghers of Calais, but probably rejected the hands as being too fiercely animated. Rodin's marble Young Mother in a Grotto is related to a mother-child pair found on the left panel of the Gates of Hell. The woman crouching in a grotto and shielding her child from the elements seems to embody maternal love and protection. The contrasting textures of the smooth figures against the rough grotto highlight the way the human forms kind of magically emerge from the living stone in a deeply primordial way, something that Rodin learned from Michelangelo. Rodin's famed marble sculpture, The Kiss, has become a universal icon for passion. The two figures literally join at the mouth and hip, as if they're melting into each other. But the story behind these subjects is more complex than one of a carefree rendezvous. The sculptor based the man and woman he carved as Paolo and Francesca, two characters again from Dante's Divine Comedy. While they were both married, they shared a forbidden kiss. And Rodin captures the blissful moment just before Francesca's husband discovers the fleeting affair and kills them both. Rodin modeled the American athlete on Samuel Stockton White III, a key member of Princeton University's gymnastics team who traveled to England to continue his athletics training at Cambridge. White met Rodin 2 years later while visiting Paris and offered to model for him. White later said of his experience in Rodin's studio, quote, "It was a long time before he was satisfied with the pose. He had me walk around his studio and studied me from all angles. Finally, he asked me to assume a natural pose. I remember sitting on a bench with my arm resting on my leg as Rodin worked and worked with his infinite sense of detail." When White asked to buy a bronze version of this piece, Rodin presented him with this, the first bronze cast, and White later became an avid art collector upon his return to Philadelphia, no doubt inspired by his experience in Rodin's studio. In the weeks leading up to Rodin's death in November 1917, his assistant Paul Crouet made a cast of the artist's right hand and inserted small torso A, one of the many plaster fragments crowding Rodin's studio. So this composite work combines a cast made from life with an original work of art. Rodin willed to the French state his studio and the right to make casts from his plasters. Because he encouraged casts of his sculpted work, Rodin's sculptures are represented in many public and private collections. The Musée Rodin was founded in 1916 and opened in 1919 at the Hôtel Biron, which is where Rodin had lived. And it holds the largest collection with more than 6,000 sculptures and 7,000 works on paper. And I'll end with a quote from the article published in the Times in the UK just after his death in November 1917. It read, "The funeral of the greatest sculptor who had been one of the highest expressions of the genius of contemporary France." Thank you.